this is a message to Canada and all the American Tawagheet. We are coming and we will destroy you.
Farah Sheridan is believed to have left his Calgary home in early 2014 to join ISIS in Iraq and Syria. A video of him burning his Canadian passport emerged shortly after.
I love to go to the people who are the operators in the actual conflict.
Journalist Ben Makuch tracked Sheridan down online, convincing him to talk. Those conversations formed the basis of 3 articles he wrote for Vice News.
The Canadian government is trying to force me to give up all the communications I've had with him, and I refused.
The police are seeking to obtain highly reliable evidence relating to serious terrorism offenses, which they cannot obtain from any other source.
So far, lower courts have agreed with police. The Supreme Court is the end of the road.
If he loses and refuses to comply with the order, Makuch could face a fine or even go to jail.
Sheridan was charged in absentia with 6 terrorism offenses, but is widely believed to have been killed in a U.S. drone strike. Still, the question for the courts remains: where's the balance between public safety and the freedom of the press?
Even though I already published all of it, I don't want to give it to them because it's going to set a very dangerous precedent that they can go and do that with anyone.
And other news organizations are watching closely. CBC News and a coalition of 12 press freedom groups were granted leave to intervene in this case. Ben Makuch joins us from Ottawa.
So Ben, journalists may, in the course of their experience, cover the Supreme Court. Actually being part of a case there is something else altogether, I imagine. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. It was definitely a very surreal experience. I mean, to be honest with you, the last 3 years of this debacle period has been interesting and bizarre for me as a journalist because it's me becoming part of the story and not me covering the story. And, you know, like you said, I have in the past gone and covered stories at the Supreme Court, and to think that I'm part of that, an actual case is sort of, it's weird.
So we heard you say there, look, I've already reported everything. I've already shared everything. So explain for people, what is it that the police want from you that you haven't already shared?
You know, that's a better question for the RCMP, because everything that I had of national security significance, you know, this individual threatened Canada and said that Canada was part of this target list for ISIS and that they were trying to inspire attacks. And I put this all out there, and I also explained, you know, all the things he was telling me about his network and how he was using social media to recruit, etc. And I think, you know, everything I had that was important is out there. I mean, I'm a journalist. I don't sit on scoops. So really what I think the RCMP is trying to do right now is clearly a fishing expedition to see what else I have or to figure out how I did my job, when really I think they should be thinking about how they should be doing theirs.
And I guess that, you know, they would argue this is a subjective definition, you saying everything that's important I've put out there, and they're saying, well, you know, it's up to us to assess what's important in the conversations.
Yeah, I mean, they're certainly entitled to that opinion. What I will say is, having been a national security reporter for the last 4 years, going deep in that space, I could tell you that what intelligence that's 4 years old for an individual that's dead and all of his network is likely dead as well, what significance would that hold for the RCMP, other than possibly proving charges against somebody posthumously?
You're in a bit of a box here. If the Supreme Court rules against you, what will you do?
I mean, I've said in the past, you know, I'm going to be taking this and as far as it needs to go, and I'm going to exhaust all options.
And what does that mean?
I mean, I'm not going to speculate on a decision that hasn't come in yet, because I think, A, it's going to drive me insane, and it's going to just give me a lot of anxiety for the next 6 months, so I can't really think about it. And once the decision comes, I'll make decisions on what to do next.
You know, for journalists who live in this world and live this kind of tension in terms of the information that we have and others who want it, it's easier for us to say why we think this is important. But for everyone watching this program who's not in the world of journalism, why is it important?
It's important because this is what journalists are able to do. I mean, when we have sources and we have source materials, having faith in a journalist that, you know, when you go and speak to them, even if you are a terrorist, or let's say you're a criminal, or you're a whistleblower in the government, when you go to a journalist, this is confidential between you two. Even if you're not a confidential source, it's a confidential experience to provide that information to the journalist because it is a journalist. It's not a police officer or a spy. And what they're trying to do in order to have me fork over my source materials is essentially making me and other journalists like me part of their police investigation. And that's, I think, to me, that's a very scary thing for a fair and democratic society like Canada to accept.
We're all going to wait with interest, you most of all, I'm sure, for the Supreme Court's decision. Thanks for talking to us.
Thanks very much for having me.